Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I hope you are well. Firstly, we have to apologize that the wrong link was pasted. Well, actually, it was the right link at the time, but our producer, Swedish Steve, had to rush to the hospital with his baby boy. We hope that you're all fine and you will be well soon. So that is why we don't have an audience tonight. But welcome, one and all. And I'm very honored to have a guest from my hometown and my country. And can I introduce John, Dibbi Breytenbach? I said that I'm very honored and privileged to have a guest whom I've never met, by the way, from my hometown and
Yeah,
my
I actually know
country.
your parents.
He knows my parents. Yes, yes. And so, Dibbi, you have a couple of interesting stories I've been told. One of them those is that you are a published author. Now, as somebody who has attempted to write a book and maybe still is attempting, I know how very difficult it is. So I'm always very hats off to anybody who's managed to write
Thank
any
you.
sort of book, especially fiction. Uh, but before we get to your books, I would like to ask you to just tell us where you were born, um, what made you into the person that you are today. So, just a very
Oh
brief
my
over.
goodness. Trial and
So,
adversity, I would say. I was born in Nelspruit, nowadays known as Mbombela in South Africa. I studied law. I used to be a music teacher because that is my major passion, and I did all the uh, Royal Schools examinations, the Trinity examinations. And then, as I said, I entered the legal profession. I work on the victim side of the law. Um, yeah, that's basically it. And then, of course, trial and adversity, load shedding, that kind of thing.
I missed. I heard something about load shedding. So, just repeat that last part, please.
I said, no, I'm actually teasing or joking with myself. Trial and adversity made me into the
Uh,
person I am today, of
okay.
which load shedding is one.
Yeah, we didn't have load shedding today. We were lucky in the Cape. So, DB, I want to ask you: were you first a music teacher and then you went into law, or was the other way
Yes,
around?
that is correct. I was first a music teacher and then I went into law. My very first job I had was teaching music straight out of matric, straight out of grade 12. I was appointed as a music teacher for grade 1 to grade 12 at St. Dominic's Academy in Newcastle in South Africa. And the year thereafter as a class music teacher at Grayston Preparatory School in Sandton in Johannesburg. Because I was practically qualified, um, I did all my graded examinations when I was still in school. Um, and then, towards the end of the second year that I taught, I was, 19, I think. Um, I had to find permanent employment because obviously you have to study education to become a full time teacher.
Yes.
And I applied for a bursary at the Department of Justice at that stage, and I received it. But before that, I was appointed as an administration clerk in the finance department. Can you believe it? Because I cannot do math. I think towards the end of grade 12, I had I think my grades were something like a double G or a double F. It was terrible, but it was between 18 and 24% for my matric year-end exams. And they appointed me in the Department of Finance, well, in the financial Department of Justice, which obviously in the civil service sense makes perfect sense. And then I applied for the bursary to study law out of self-defense because I couldn't work with numbers. But yeah, that is how I ended up in law.
Can I just
My
tell you,
goodness.
ladies, about an anecdote about my early days in teaching? This is a very long time ago. I just finished my first degree and I'd done some summer jobs But then it came to the start of term and I thought I better get myself a career. So I was appointed by this very bad school as a science teacher. And one of the colleagues in the staff room told me that he'd begun as an arts teacher. He was the music teacher at the time, but he told me that he'd begun as the arts teacher and he was giving out some sheets of colored paper to his class. And he said, I want you to do so-and-so on the green paper and such on the red paper. This half of the class gets red, that half, and they were all grey.
Oh my goodness.
So having discovered he was colorblind, the next week, they made him the music teacher.
Oh my word. Okay. I think that might, yes. That is not.
So Dibbi, I want to. Sorry.
No, I always say, you know, that law is like the remedial class of the profession. If you can do math, you go into engineering or medicine or something like that. If you can't do math, you become a lawyer.
I don't think lawyers would like that to hear that very much. So Dibbi, I did a little bit of sneaking around on your Facebook profile, and I saw that you and I differed 2 years in age. I won't say which goes which way. But
you might.
I'm not sensitive about my age at all. So, but one never knows.
Neither am I.
So you matriculated in 1988, if I'm doing my calculations correctly.
1989. Don't add on.
Oh, okay. So because I matriculated in 1990, and so
youngsters, both of us.
Absolutely, spring chickens. John knows
course.
that. Yes, no, definitely. But so you started to study and to work in the Department of Justice around about 1992, 93 with the
towards the end of 1991.
Okay. So you were in the thick of things when we went from the old South Africa to the new South Africa. So how much experience did you have in the sort of old justice system?
I would say I entered into the Department of Justice in 1991. And obviously, everybody knows that the entire situation or the entire country changed in April 1994. So, what, more or less 3 years? And I was there towards the end of the old system and the beginning of the new system, which is a very privileged position to be in. You basically kind of like you were there during the entire bridging period from the old to the new.
Did you've never had your own private practice? You've always worked for the government, am I right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so before I want to ask you a few questions about your life and work in criminal law, which is those of my friends who enjoy true crime and crime fiction would be very keen to hear some of your stories, because I always say that truth is stranger than fiction. And so before I ask you about that, I want to just ask you about your writing. Did you always know that you wanted to write a book? How did that come about, that you started writing?
One of my fellow authors, one of the older authors actually, who I look up to very much, once told me that a writer isn't made, a writer is born. And that is not, that is who you are. And I've always known that I was going to write someday. As a matter of fact, I've always written. I've just never written to publish. And I had a very bad cancer scare in 2014, which fortunately was erroneous. It was an erroneous diagnosis. but that kind of makes you reprioritize your life, and it makes you reorganize your bucket list. And that was basically the catalyst which prodded me onwards. At that stage, I fortunately had a manuscript ready for publication, and it was accepted for publication very shortly thereafter. And from 2014 to this year, I've, with the exception of 2021, published a novel every year. So yeah,
Wow.
that was basically it. I've always written. My brother is also a published author, and the two of us have always basically written for each other, which of course led to a lot of sibling unhappiness because siblings tend to be very brutally honest with each other. And there were times when he told me that I wrote crap, and I told him that he wrote crap, and then we didn't speak to each other for months because we're sensitive that way.
Siblings, eh? What would you do with them?
Oh
What would
well.
you do with them? Yeah, I
Sorry.
was telling we were laughing tonight because my three children, the older two differ only by 15 months, and my son who's now 20, and very proud of his looks and physique. And I don't know if you do Movember in the UK, John, but it's this uh, uh, now the English word has left my mind completely. It's to promote male health, Movember. So,
That's right. Yeah.
my son, we were sitting at the dinner table, and my daughter looked at her brother and she said, "What's that on your upper lip? Go wash your face." But she was dead serious.
Yeah. Well, of
It's
course,
my
Yeah.
I do November, Mo January, Mo February.
no, but siblings do have a way of keeping one's feet very firmly planted on Mother
Absolutely.
Earth, terra firma. But Dibbi, I want to ask you, especially for those of us, and I have to concede that I have my dose of enjoyment of crime stories as well, and FreeThought, like if I can just tell our audience, I my parents moved there when I was 5 years old. So I lived in FreeThought from 1978 until 1990, when I matriculated. And then my parents lived there until 4 years ago. So it was my hometown. And I always thought of FreeThought as the sleepy little rural town where nothing much ever happened. But that seems to not quite be the case. I know my mom at one stage taught the special needs class. I'm talking many 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago. And there was, I think they were twins, and they actually killed their father for money because he had a lot of cash, and he hid the cash behind the wallpaper. And so these boys killed their father, and then they couldn't find the money. And somehow there was a young investigative officer, and he discovered this crime. And I also know of a case that was quite widely published in South Africa where I think he was a young lawyer who faked his own death. And my
Yes.
parents attended his funeral. And the funny
I
thing
did
is,
too.
you did too? What is
Yes.
it like to attend the funeral of somebody only to discover that
Uh,
he's not really dead?
Slightly bizarre. Um, it's actually a very weird sensation because it was a very, very big funeral. I think your parents can attest to that. Um, I think most of the town was there,
Yes.
and everybody was very sad. But we already, how can I put it? We heard very different versions of the way that this young lawyer came to his end, which did not quite correspond with each other. I mean, one of the versions was that his body was discovered uh, somewhere near Durban, and one of the other versions was that he had a heart attack, and one of the other versions was that he was decapitated. And it was really very strange because the legal fraternity in this town is very small and everybody knows everybody. And a couple of weeks later, well, a couple of months later, I think 2 or 3 months later, after the funeral now, of course, um, he rose from the dead, and it was
So it was
it was surreal.
so do you call him Lazarus now?
Yes, we actually do.
Okay, so Dibbi, does that do experiences like that? And I don't know if you can or want to tell us about some of the more bizarre or interesting cases that you've dealt with. So the first question I have is: does your experience working in criminal law sort of give you a nose? Do you get a no? Do you know when somebody is telling a lie? Do you have a gut feeling? Is it something that one can learn? Is it something that do people sometimes still fool you? That's the first question I want to ask. So answer that one for us, please.
Okay, yes, people will always fool you because you must remember that obviously the more you deal with liars, the more adept you become at reading the behavior because people's behavior generally is very predictable. People like to think that they are unique. They like to think that they are unpredictable. They like to think that they can hide things. But generally, if you take the broad spectrum of the population, I would say roughly 90% of people will not be able to hide any devious behavior, not to an expert or to a person who's adept at reading people. What I often tell people, and which I find endlessly fascinating, it helps me as a novelist as well, is that when you go to court, it's very much like a laboratory where you study human behavior because you deal with people at a very basic level and you deal with people with with reference to very basic emotions. And that kind of behavior is predictable in the same sense as when you see an elephant flapping its ears and raising its trunk, then you know it's going to charge. People's behavior is the same, but obviously, you get criminals who are very, very good at lying, and it makes it almost impossible to, to detect it when they do. Um, Generally, those people have a psychopathic tendency. Um, they are very sly, they are very clever, and of course, as a lawyer, it is very satisfying to meet minds with a clever criminal. If you can beat them at their own game, it is very, very, very satisfying.
Okay, so I want to just dig into that for a bit. You are a public prosecutor, am I right? Is that the right? That's the correct term?
I would prefer to refer to it as a criminal lawyer working with the victims of crime.
Okay. Okay. So, but the government pays your salary. Is that
That is
you
correct,
don't have?
yes. I'm a
Okay.
civil servant.
Yes. Okay. So if there's a criminal cases that in a criminal case the state is actually the body that makes the charge. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We drive we drive the case.
Yes. So you basically on the side of the victim, or the
That is correct.
yes, yes. So
Yes.
so um, if I mean I've no idea what it's like to work in that field, but if one looks at the newspapers, it can be traumatic. Have you do you how do you deal with the trauma? Well, and the effect of crime in people's lives. How do you distance yourself from it? How do you
Okay.
not fall apart?
It's a question that's been asked to me many times over the years, and it is one that I'm going to answer very simply. People must understand that I find it, well, okay, let me deal with the answer from this way around. I am not the person who is raped or murdered or robbed. I'm a functionary like a pen or a pencil or a stapler. I get, and I think most people, most professionals in law enforcement will say the same thing. It is hugely annoying, and I also think insulting to the victims of crime when people claim secondary trauma because of something that happened to somebody else. You make a choice when you go into law enforcement to help people. Obviously, when you deal with criminal law, you know when you go into it that you are going to deal with traumatized people. But it is their trauma, it's not yours. And
Mm.
I think it's extremely selfish. Those people lose so much. The victims of crime lose so much that it is very selfish from people in the helping profession to lay claim to their trauma as well. Their trauma is their trauma. It's not yours, and it's not your right to take it. Um, you are there to fulfill a role, and it's a very practical role. Um, quite frankly, it might sound very hard, but I almost want to say if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. But that is not quite what I want. That's not quite what I mean. You make the decision to do this, and I'm not the person who regularly quotes from scripture, but in Isaiah they talk about standing in the breach. And that is what you do for the time or the period that you deal with this victim. And then you move on because there will always be more victims that need you. But that is a choice. You don't have the
That's
luxury of usurping somebody else's trauma.
that's a very interesting perspective that I've never heard before, and I actually, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it also makes you good at your job because, I mean, if a civil servant who has to perform a function, like you say, harsh though it may sound, if you fall apart every time you have to um, listen to the trauma of the victim so that you can pursue the criminal, then you're not going to be of any use. You're going to be like a stapler that gets stuck when you want to staple a bunch of papers. I've never thought of it like that. It's a
Well,
very
you see, the thing is, but I think the perspective basically is it's not about you. You
yeah.
need to remove the ego from the equation. It's not about you. And if you can't make that, if you can't separate the ego and the office, then don't go into the office.
Then I can absolutely see that happening. It's I see John coming in. Maybe he wants to ask. John, do you want to ask something?
Well, yeah, I've got a couple of things that I wanted to throw into this conversation. One is Dibbi mentioned that authors are made. You sort of discover you're an author. It's in you when you're young and you want to write, and that's your mission. That's what you've got to do. And it reminded me of a children's author that's become successful in this country, probably worldwide to an extent. Her name is Holly Smale, and she's written a series of books called Geek Girl. And she
Mm-hmm.
always knew that she was going to be a writer. She'd kept a diary, and she'd always written short stories and hadn't done anything with them until she got this first edition of the series Geek Girl published. And I think there's been 6 now. I recently bought them for my daughters. And the main character in these stories is a girl called Harriet, because that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because authors generally they're safer when they are writing from experience. Fiction authors, I should say. I mean, I've never been able to write fiction. I don't have enough imagination. I'm grounded in reality, and so I can write great fact stuff. I can write a case. I'd probably make a reasonable lawyer, but I can't do the imagination stuff. Anyway, getting back to Holly Smale, after she'd written some of these books and had them very successful and sold and done book tours and so on, she had an email from one of her readers, or the mum of one of her readers, who said, "Did you realize that your main character, Harriet, is autistic?"
Really?
And what had happened was Holly had always thought she was different. She'd grown up in and imagined that she couldn't relate. All the other kids wanted to play together, but not with her, you know? So she had a difficult schooling herself. And then, so she was happy just doing her writings. But she thought she was some alien that had arrived on this planet. And she thought that her job was to observe others interacting and to copy them in the hope that somehow she would become so good at it, she'd be accepted into humanity. And then she wrote these books and became a successful author, and they diagnosed her from her writings. She's autistic. And the clues in her stories had given that away.
So I want to use that as a segue to move towards your writing of fiction. But before I get there, I want to really, that's the morbid curiosity part of me, I suppose, or the true crime lover in me. Can you, if you can, if you can't, it's fine, but can you tell us the most bizarre case, or one or two of the most strange, or maybe, criminals are sometimes funny, and crime can be it can be very dark, but there can be dark humor. Could you share with us something that really, a case or two that really has stuck with you?
Okay. There are quite a number. I've been dealing with these cases for 25 years, and I deal with serious and violent crimes. So there's very little entertainment value in serious and violent crimes. I deal with, in the past rather, I dealt with farm attacks. I dealt with child rapes. I've dealt with adult rape. I've dealt with many, many, many murders. Attempted murders. There are actually not very many very funny things happening with those cases. It becomes a blur of extreme violence, and most of them are generally very serious. Yeah. So I'm sorry.
No.
I'm racking my brain to think of something humorous, but these cases are very, very, very serious.
Maybe I think I might have miscommunicated. Funny is not the right word, but you do get criminals who are really smarter than they think who are not as smart as they think they are, and they think they'll get away with it, and then they do stupid things.
Well, offhand, I can tell you offhand, now that I think of it, as I said, there were so many of these cases, there still are. Offhand, if I think of one specific one, there was a guy who went to steal a Nissan 1400 pickup from a lady's premises. And he had to hotwire this vehicle to steal it. And he had to push it. He was all by himself. He had to push it some ways out of the what do you call it? The driveway. Sorry, I'm thinking in English and Afrikaans simultaneously. And before he could hotwire it, and this car rolled forward, and it pinned him against the garage wall. So this guy was arrested by the vehicle he tried to steal. He couldn't get past it. I mean, he couldn't explain it away. There he was. He was.
So that's a case that's funny. Unfortunately, the worst harm was to the attempted or the criminal. Was he?
Yeah,
I mean, how long was he trapped there for? Did he?
all night actually.
So what did
He
he
was
eventually decide that he has to cry for help? Because I mean, you can get seriously hurt
no.
if a vehicle pins you like that.
He was discovered the following morning in the garage when the people went to work, and then yeah, he was discovered there between the car and the wall.
Well, um, it's very it's yeah, it's crime is no laughing matter. And just on a more serious note, do you think that South Africa is more violent than other countries? Obviously, this is anecdotal, uh, because I don't think you've done empirical research. But do you think that we are a particularly violent society?
Well, as a fellow South African, what do you say?
Well, my experience is anecdotal, and yes, I do think so. I think we resort to violence maybe faster than other societies do. I have a couple of ideas about why, but tell me what you think.
What I cannot compare except statistically with other countries, but what I can say, and statistics prove that, is that we are equally or easily on par with countries at war as far as violent offences are concerned. I think 5 of the 20 most violent cities or most dangerous cities in the world are in South Africa, which is very sad. Um, and it's heartbreaking, really.
Yes.
Um, but that we do have a very violent society is a fact. Yes.
I won't ask you right now why you think it is like that. I think the reasons are complex. Maybe you and I should do an Afrikaans podcast and we can talk about that, because I want to ask you about your books and about writing,
Mm.
because I.
Before before we get onto that, can I throw something into this mix? Because I have quite a lot of interaction with Americans, where of course the crime statistics are very much more severe than they are in the UK, where I'm based. And
Mm-hmm.
the issue here is that guns are very easily obtainable. We don't have gun shops in this country, but in America, you can walk into the local supermarket, go to the gun counter, and choose a gun. And it's very different in Europe, where guns are almost illegal and certainly very hard to get hold of. You've got to have a genuine reason, like you've got an infestation of rabbits or something and need a shotgun, or you're in the British sharpshooting team and you need to practice your target shooting. That's the sort of reason you need to get a gun in this country legally. There are a few illegal guns, of course, but the question that I often have to get involved in arguing is, in America they've got an entirely different idea. They think it's their right, it would be an imposition of their freedom to take their guns away from them. A lot of people have several guns, so there's more than the number of people in the number of guns. And what they won't seem to connect is the fact that this piece of technology, all technology makes things easier. You know, I mean, if you've got a can of beef, you want a can opener because that makes it easier. And a gun makes killing humans easier. It's got no other purpose. So they don't seem to be able to connect those obvious facts.
I I I think it's because, and I'd like it to, maybe we can have this as a topic someday, John. South Africa and the United States have one thing in common. We were both colonized round about the same time, and we have a frontier mentality.
Yeah.
And I think that contributes to our love of guns, because South Africans also love our guns. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not talking about uh, how guns are legislated. If you just think about the psyche, many people, we live in this frontier mentality, and
Yeah.
it takes more than 200 or 300 years for the frontier mentality to work out of our systems. And then we have a very violent history in South Africa and in the United States. I mean, you have,
Yes.
if you think about apartheid and two cultures clashing, and sometimes more than two cultures, and the one doing anything that can and not shying away from using violence to subdue the other one. And it's just so. But before we dig too deep into history and politics, DB, I want to ask you. You said as a criminal lawyer, when you spoke about when I asked you about trauma and the trauma of your victims, you said that it's not your place to experience secondary trauma. You have to stand away, and that made me think: is that almost the same thing that an author does when you become a narrator? Is there also that sense of almost standing like an omniscient being and not being part of the story? Uh,
Oh
so
no, oh no.
it's not like that.
Um, I can tell you my last novel, the one that was published in August, was one of those that I suspect I wrote myself into PTSD with that book. I was the book basically goes about the insurgency in Mozambique, currently in the Cabo Delgado province, which is one of those. How can I put it? I don't want to call it a sideline conflict as compared to Ukraine, but it is it's not something that it's not a conflict that gathers very much international interest, although it's very severe. Um, and I had a lot of technical, well, not a lot, quite a number rather, of technical advisors who work in that area. And I received quite a bit of information and up to date information on the insurgency as it happened,
DB, can I interrupt
including.
you? For those of
Mm,
our audience who might not know, this is now the Islamic State that's making insurgencies into Mozambique. Is that right?
that is correct. It forms a large part of the narrative of the novel. And I dealt with a lot of um, up to the minute information that I worked into the novel. A lot of videos, a lot of photos, a lot of, oh, I can't even begin to tell you. And it was really, it became part of my daily existence for 18 months. I basically lived, ate and slept the Mozambican insurgency. So you become part of the story. It's a story like that, which is so intense. You really do become part of it, and you're not no longer an omniscient narrator. You are part of the story, and the story is part of your life. And I think what made it even worse was the fact that it never stopped. Even although the book was published, the conflict didn't stop. So when you listen to the radio or when you watch the news, it's still carrying on. It's still continuing.
Yes.
And that was bad. Yes.
Yes.
Well,
So this
bad
is
in
interesting. This is interesting because it seems to me there are two sorts of authors of fiction, and one of them sets out a story as a skeleton, plans everything from beginning to end, and then goes back and starts writing it. And the other one sets off and doesn't know where it's going, and
that is what happened.
only discovers the denouement when they get to the end. Which are you?
Yes, I think I am. Well, I think I'm a bit of a hybrid. Um, this story, this last one, wasn't supposed to end like or happen like it did. It was actually quite a well thought out story, which embroidered on a previous novel. And whilst I was planning the novel, The insurgency happened in Mashimba de Praia in 2020, in August 2020. And that was the first time that South Africans heard, or people heard, I don't know if there was any news about that in the UK, but that was the first time we heard that the Islamic State insurgents, or the Islamic State was involved in the insurgency. Now, that is our neighboring country, which makes it very, well, it was very interesting at the time, rather, if you put it that way. I think that's the best saying that way. And I started doing research on Mozambique. But because of the fact that the Mozambican government clamped down on journalists in the area, there was very little, if any, information available about the insurgency. And I had to spread my feelers into the realms of people who work there, private military contractors, uh, uh, people or aid workers, international aid organizations. And the story then happened basically parallel with the insurgency um, from August 2020 to the attack on Palma in 2021, in March 2021. And so it happened, the story and the insurgency happened simultaneously. It was really rather surreal.
That is, yeah. Truth is stranger than fiction, or fiction stranger than truth. And sometimes the lines get so blurred that we are not quite sure which is which. It's interesting that you say this particular story, sort of went its own way, because I studied literature, and it's something that's always fascinated me, is this interaction between author, character, plot, and how I've often heard authors say that it's as if the characters become their own people. They become people, and they almost act independently. And it's this mesmerizing interaction that authors have with their characters. So yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you, DB. How many books have you published now? You've said you've
7.
published 7. Okay, and which one is your best selling?
I think the last one, as a matter of fact, I don't know. I must tell you, because I don't write full time, I don't write for an income. Um, I'm not really, I, I don't really look at the stats.
So I see we have about 10 minutes remaining. So before we forget, I know DB, your books are written in Afrikaans, but I told
Yes,
you in a private conversation that you'd be surprised how many people are interested in Afrikaans and speak Afrikaans, and how far and wide
wonderful.
uh, the YouTube audience goes. I told you that Swedish Steve, our producer, is fascinated by Afrikaans. So please, to our audience, if you know anybody who might be interested, and one never knows when DB's books might get translated, your website, DB, if you can share that.
I don't have a website. I am basically on Facebook.
Okay.
That is
Okay.
my sole way of communicating with the reading audience. I should get a website. I know. I have been told I should,
Next
but
year.
I'm a very, very bad administrator of my own affairs. I leave it
I
in the
want to.
capable hands.
You can,
Mm.
if you spell. So on Facebook, can we find you as DB Breytenbach, or?
That is correct.
Okay, so you can just search for DB, as in DIBI, and then Breytenbach. Are you related to the Breytenbach family of the author Breytenbach? Are you related, or do you know whether you
Yeah,
are related?
we are all the Breytenbachs are somehow or another related. Yes,
It's most white South Africans, if we dig back far enough, all of us are, I think, are related, because we
I
haven't
think
been
so
in this.
too.
Yeah, I think if we dig back, and sometimes you don't even have to go really, really far and wide. So, DB, I want to ask you about, to move back to the state of South African law. I attended a talk by Albie Sachs 2 weeks ago, and one of the questions that he was asked is what gives him hope for South Africa, because we have load shedding and we have terrible crime and we have um, poverty, and we are the most unequal society in the country. Listen to me, in the world, and so we lose hope. So besides the fact that we haven't had two prime ministers in 1 year like my friends in the UK have had,
Three,
uh, three, three, three prime
three.
ministers at least.
Three, yes, got three.
Sorry, sorry, time just flies when you prime ministers just fly when they're having fun,
Yes,
isn't it? So,
exactly. Yes.
working in the Department of Justice, do you have hope for us? Do you
Yes,
have
I
hope?
do.
Okay.
Yes, I definitely do. And I think what gives me hope are South Africans. Um, I think people will be amazed uh, to know how much goodwill there is amongst South Africans, ordinary South Africans from all walks of life. We are, I think, as the years progress, we have come to realize that we're all in this boat together. And on ground level, grassroots level, I do think that there's a lot of hope. Uh, People are uh, reaching out to each other more and more and more. And that generally really is so heartwarming to see, to be honest. I really, I don't think I want to be any other place.
Well, that's so heartening, and I can agree with you that despite all the troubles we have, I think South Africans, although we are definitely as a society very violent and prone to violence, somehow the goodness still prevails, and that's a question that I want to ask you in a more. It's related to the previous question, but do you still have belief in the goodness of humanity working with crime and terrible things that people do to one another? Do you still have faith in humanity after 25 years
Yes,
in criminal?
yes, I do. As a matter of fact, it gets reinforced on a daily basis. When you see people at that very basic uh, place, the most basic emotions, and you see how they come to the fore, and people you never expected of become heroes. They behave like heroes. They behave honorably. They behave nobly. Um, yeah, no, my belief in humanity keeps strengthening. Yeah.
Yes. I
Um,
agree with
That's
that.
fantastic.
We we may have a tiny percentage in the population because of variation who have no, who are uncooperative to say the least. You know, who want their own desires fulfilled even at the cost of somebody else and have no remorse for whatever harm they do. There's going to be a small percentage of them because of variation. But the vast
exactly.
majority of humanity are, are good to each other.
That is my attitude as well, John. I don't think. Let me put it this way. I'm going to quote a Facebook meme here. The universe did not make, and I'm using assholes and not assholes. Assholes, it sounds better. Um, it didn't make so many of them, but they are placed or were placed strategically so that you have to run into one or two of them every day. But most people in the world are not idiots. Most people in the world merely want to get on with their lives. They don't want conflict. They don't want to murder, rape, rob, and commit mayhem. They just want to continue with their lives and carry on.
Mm,
And those are the people who give me hope for humanity.
Mm,
yes, and
that's very nice.
this is borne out because if you want people to behave in a horrible way to each other, in other words, if you want to make them into soldiers who are prepared to kill for some pretext, you've got to put them through some really rigorous training so that they aggression comes to the fore, and so that they think in terms of the enemy as though they're inhuman, dehumanized. So it doesn't matter if you kill these people, they're not like us, they're really inhuman. And then after they've been through the war and done their killing, they come home and they've got PTSD because our brains are not designed to work like that.
We are not wired that way. Most of us are not wired that way. And the few of us that are actually have the psychological denominations to qualify them. They actually have titles all by themselves.
Yes.
And there's more and more evidence from neurological studies that there's actually some physical brain defects. I don't know if you are at all interested in neuropsychiatry and
I am.
And are you familiar with the work of Robert Sapolsky?
No, I am not. But I have done a lot of research on psychopathy. Because that is the kind of affliction that we deal with mostly in my work.
Yes. Well, I will send you some links to some very informative YouTube videos. I'm sure you will enjoy Robert Sapolsky. I have one question. My mom said, I must ask you, are you still the organist of the Hervormde Kerk in Vryheid?
No, I'm not. I don't have access to a church organ at the moment. I've restricted myself to the piano. I use most of my available time to write. So that is what I do on Sundays nowadays, is I write.
Okay, well, I think the world is a better place for it. And in my personal opinion, I think you are probably, well, although it must be, if you love music, then a good session behind a church organ is probably something that you miss from time to time. And uh, I, I got married in the NG Moederkerk in the it's called
in the Klipkerk.
The Klipkerk, the stone church, and it has a beautiful organ, and I love organ music myself. So maybe you can. I'm just seeing Dean Kruger says he grew up in Vryheid. Okay, well, so there's three of us. So John, I don't know if you know, but Vryheid means freedom in Afrikaans.
Oh, yeah.
So
I can see the derivation now, but I didn't know. Yeah.
So the town that Dibbi lives in and that I grew up in means freedom. And we hope that, Dibbi, you will have many more free Sunday mornings to write. And if you know somebody who might be keen to read a good Afrikaans crime novel, and go and search for Dibbi on Facebook. And maybe you can get a translator, because it seems that your writings are growing in popularity, and it's fantastic. And it was lovely talking to you, John.
Lovely talking to you too.
I'm going to do a quick plug. Our guest next week. You've caught me unawares. Is it Elsaby Brits?
Yes, it is. Yes.
So Dibbi, this is next week will be the third week in a row that we have a South African guest. Do you know Elsaby Brits? She is
the science journalist.
The science journalist, yes. So it's
yes, I do.
I always joke and say to John that I'm recolonizing the UK via YouTube. So next week we have Elsaby Brits. She is an award-winning science writer, science journalist. She's had a very interesting life. One of her passions is actually Emily Hobhouse, and if I'm not mistaken, she's working on a book by Emily Hobhouse. She's done.
No, she's already written the book.
She's written the book. That's right. Yes,
I've read it. It's brilliant.
Yeah, that's right. But I think she might publish another one. I just see her posts on Facebook, and she's constantly doing more and more research about Emily Hobhouse. So there's a connection between South Africa and the UK. So next week it's Dibbi Breytenbach, science writer, and also author of, is it a biography of
Yes.
Emily Hobhouse. Dibbi, it was fantastic to have a chat with you. It was really interesting. And thank you for the positive news that you gave South Africans, because which politician was it that said in South Africa, the worst never happens? We
Jan
always,
Smuts.
was it Jan Smuts? I thought so. So thank you. And to our international visitors, South Africa is actually not that dangerous if you know where to go. Please come and visit us. It's a beautiful country, and you will love us. And on that note,
Thank you so much, guys.
Bye-bye, Dibbi. Bye-bye, John.
Bye-bye. Bye, John.
Thank you, Dibbi.